Ralph 124C41 Plus, Chapter 10. During September, Alice and her father remained Ralph's guests, extending their stay at his urgent request. James 212B422 made a most satisfactory chaperone. If they visited one of the great historical museums, he always managed to disappear in search of some exhibit, leaving the other two to sit on a bench to wait his return, which was often delayed purposely. But to his daughter and the scientist time had become of little importance, and though the engineer was sometimes gone an hour, when he returned he would find them still sitting on the bench, sometimes deep in conversation, sometimes absorbed in a silence that meant more than any words could express. Together they were blissfully happy, apart they were wretchedly alone. Ralph, it appeared, had completely forgotten numerous of his lectures in which he had labelled love as nothing but a perfumed animal instinct. No lover more abject than he now, none more humble in the presence of his divinity. During those weeks they had arrived at a mutual understanding. All the world knew and rejoiced in their happiness. Ralph had always been extremely popular with the people. Even the planet governor himself had been moved to privately express his approval. Many times had the scientist worried him. Ralph had so often been restive under the restraints which must of necessity be imposed upon one so important to the Earth's progress. And now, with this new influence to hold him, the governor felt that the task of keeping Ralph contented had been lifted from the official's overburdened shoulders. All the world rejoiced, all but two, and for them the knowledge of the two lovers' happiness was gall and wormwood. One was roused to fury and the other plunged in despair. To Fernand, the scientist, was one hitherto unforeseen obstacle to be removed from his path in his conquest of Alice. To the Martian, knowing beforehand that his passion was hopeless, this knowledge that she loved another was nevertheless a bitter blow. Before, at least, she had been heart-free. Wretched as he had been, bitter as he had been against the laws that made such a union impossible, there had been the barren comfort of the fact that she belonged to no one else. Now, even that was taken from him, and he felt that he could bear no more. In his desperation, he made up his mind to leave Earth, and immediately booked his passage to Mars. But on the very eve of his departure, he found himself unable to make the decision that would separate him from her forever, and the next interplanetary liner which left Earth for Mars carried not himself, but this code letter to his best friend on his distant planet. New York, September 20th, 2660. To Rananol, AK-42. Although I am booked on the terrestrial which departs tomorrow, I have cancelled my reservation and consequently will not arrive on Mars November 31st, as planned. I do not know whether I shall take passage on the next transport or not. In fact, I don't know what I shall do. I am mad with despair and anguish. 1,000 times over have I wished that I had never come to this planet. I have not told you before, but as perhaps you have guessed from my previous letters, I am in love with a terrestrial woman. Never mind her name, I have loved her from the first moment I saw her. You who have never visited the earth can hardly understand. It does not matter. I have tried in every way to free myself from this mad infatuation, but it is hopeless. Chemicals and radio treatments seem but to accentuate my longing for that which is forever beyond my reach. I thought at first that I could conquer myself, but I know now that I cannot, and the knowledge is driving me to madness. She has never known, and I think no one else here does. I have told none but you, my friend. Always I feared that in some way I might betray myself to her. There are times now I wish I had, and yet to have her suffer as I am suffering, I could not have borne that. I will, I suppose, go the way of all Martians who have had the misfortune to care for terrestrial. A little listadinide injected under the skin will free me from an existence which has become a daily torture, unless I find a way to evade the harsh laws. Please hand the enclosed documents to my second. If I do not see you again, do not grieve for me, but remember our friendship, and think sometimes of your unhappy friend, Sanora. After his letter had gone, he sat rigid, motionless by the window, with unseeing eyes fixed on the city below him. At last he rises with a sigh and leaves the room. Is there no way out of such misery? Is there no straw he can grasp? Of a very different calibre was an epistle sent by Fernand, 610, to his friend Paul 9B 1261. New York, September 28th, 2660. Dear Paul, you have heard the gossip, but don't fear my having a broken heart. I'm not easily downed, and I have a card or two yet to play in this game. Fact is, Alice is as hard to conquer as a Stelonian wall is to break through. That, however, is to my liking, my dear Paul. I love obstacles, particularly when the goal is as pretty as Alice. I have never wanted her more than now that she has thrown me down. Perhaps if she had ever encouraged me, I would not have cared a rap for her. But this opposition inflames me. Now I will have her, and she shall love me, mark my words. I have mentioned to you before the ridiculous Martian Sanora, I believe. It is very amusing to see him staring at Alice with adoration in those enormous eyes of his. I really believe he is in love with her, but those Martians are so self-controlled, it is hard to tell anything about them. If Alice had fallen in love with this lanky 7-foot Sanora, she would have been lost to me and to all the rest of the world. That fellow certainly can be sugary when he wants to. However, she really imagines that she's in love with this crazy scientist, and right now I'm decidedly de trop. That worries me very little, I assure you. She will soon learn to love me once I can get her away from him, and I am going to provide for that. Everything has been arranged, and I'm only awaiting my opportunity. If I am successful, I will take her out into space for a few months. My machine is in readiness. It is the latest type and the finest I have ever seen. Provisions, books, reels for the hypnobioscope, instruments, etc. In fact, everything you can think of is on board. I have even provided a well-trained maid. I can assure you Alice won't find it lonesome. Besides, I flatter myself that I can be very entertaining. Before I close, I must ask you to attend to several matters for me as per enclosed rolls. You will understand everything better after you read the instructions. I do not expect to be away for more than 3 months at the latest, and you will see from the grey document that I empower you to take charge of my affairs. I will send you a message from on board the machine if all goes well. Until then, Fernand. It was the night of the full moon. There was a faint touch of crispness in the early autumn breeze that now and again gently ruffled the waters of the ocean. 1,000 stars danced lightly in the sky and were reflected in the undulating waves below. And in the moonlit path over the waters hovered the aerocab, gleaming silvery white in the radiance. The cab is far from New York, away from the beaten traffic. Occasionally other aircraft come into view, but always at a distance. To Alice and Ralph, this solitude is paradise. Night after night they hire an aerocab and fly to this lonely airway, where, seated side by side with only the driver for a chaperone, they are absolutely happy. The driver is a silent man who, as long as he is well paid for his time, is content to describe endless circles indefinitely. On this particular evening, Alice seems to Ralph more lovely than he has ever seen her before. In the caressing light of the mellow moon, her flower-like face glows with a new radiance, and her dark eyes, shadowed with long curling lashes, are mistily tender. Between these two there is no need for words, so perfectly are their thoughts attuned that each knows what the other feels. And so presently their hands steal out and meet and clasp, and it seems to both that heaven could hold no greater happiness than this, until with one accord they turn their faces to each other, and their lips meet. To them nothing exists beyond themselves and their love. The voice of another aerocab driver hailing them makes them realize that they are still ties that bind them to earth, and they move apart a little self-consciously as a cab draws alongside their own. "Having some trouble with my motor," called the newcomer. "Could you let me have a few copper connectors to repair the damage?" "Sure," returned the driver, and the two cabs came together and are made fast. Ralph, seeing that this man could attend to the matter, turns away from them towards Alice, and again draws her hand into his own, where it snuggles confidently. Quite suddenly he is aware of a sickish sweet odor which almost instantly becomes suffocating. He is then conscious of the pressure of Alice's fingers, and then blackness overwhelms him. End of chapter 10.